My name, or the closest sound your voice could make of it, is Threl Ka Vosin. I am the third observer of the Sitaran Compact, and I want this written down clearly, for whatever record survives me. I asked to go on this mission. Nobody forced me. I chose it myself, because I believed I understood what I was about to see. I did not. For 400 cycles of my life, I have studied other species. I have watched wars begin and end on 9 different worlds. I have written reports on courage, on fear, on the strange things a mind will do when it is close to losing everything. I thought I had seen every shape that bravery could take. I was wrong, and I am still trying to understand how wrong. The mission itself was supposed to be simple. There was a small, cold moon called Karos 9, a place with nothing on it but ice and quiet. 2 powers wanted it anyway. The Ashkarai Dominion, an old and proud fleet with a long history of victory, and a small human colonial group that had only been given a handful of ships to defend it. My orders were simple too. Watch, record, do not interfere. The Compact wanted to understand what humans were capable of, because they were new to the wider galaxy, and nobody yet knew if they were worth trusting, fearing, or ignoring. I was given a small hidden pod, tucked safely into a field of broken rock and old debris above the moon. From there, I could see everything, and be seen by no one. I had enough supplies to last many days. I believed, foolishly, that I had chosen the safest seat in the galaxy. I did not know yet that the safest seat can still leave you shaken forever. The Ashkarai fleet arrived first. 72 ships, moving together in a pattern I recognized instantly. It is called the coronet, a formation shaped like the petals of a great flower, built to surround an enemy from every direction at once. In 400 years of Ashkarai history, this formation had never lost a battle. I noted this fact in my log with confidence. Then the human ships arrived. There were only 19 of them, 19 small ships facing 72 proud, well-trained warships. I remember writing in my log that this was not truly a battle at all, but a formality. I predicted, with full confidence, that the humans would surrender or be defeated within a few hours. I even began drafting the opening lines of my report before a single shot had been fired, because I believed I already knew how the story would end. I was very proud of my prediction. I want that written down too, so that anyone reading this understands exactly how wrong I turned out to be. The Ashkarai fleet moved into position calmly, confidently, exactly as their training demanded. The 19 human ships did something strange. Instead of running or forming a simple defensive circle, which is what every species I had studied would normally do when badly outnumbered. They split into 3 small groups of 6 ships each. 1 ship remained alone, sitting motionless in the middle of the formation, doing absolutely nothing. At first, I believed this was some kind of mistake, perhaps a broken communication system, or a ship that had simply failed to receive its orders in time. I wrote in my log that this appeared to be a non-important error, unrelated to their overall strategy. I was wrong about that too. It was not an error, it was a plan. The Ashkarai formation moved to surround the single, silent ship, the way a hand closes gently around something small and harmless. I watched 41 Ashkarai warships gather closely around that one human vessel, which had made no attempt to escape, fight back, or even move. Then it released all of its stored energy at once. Every part of that ship let go of its power together, in a single, coordinated moment. It was not an accident. It was not panic. Someone aboard that ship had calculated exactly how much energy to release, and exactly when to release it. Someone had stayed behind, fully aware of what would happen, simply to make sure the timing was perfect. The result tore straight through the heart of the Ashkarai formation. Shields failed. Ships lost power. The proud flower shape that had never been broken in 4 centuries suddenly had no center left at all. While the Ashkarai commanders were still shouting instructions across their communication channels, trying to understand what had just happened, the remaining 18 human ships stopped pretending to retreat. The 3 small groups that had been quietly waiting suddenly moved as one, striking from 3 different directions at once, hitting exactly the ships whose defenses had just been weakened by the shockwave. I sat completely still inside my hidden pod. My sensors kept recording automatically, because for a long moment my hands had simply stopped working. I watched 19 ships, which I had predicted would be defeated within a few hours, instead cut through the center of a 72-ship fleet in barely more than 10 minutes. My very next log entry, in its entirety, reads only this: I need to reconsider everything. I have studied many kinds of courage before. I have seen soldiers fight bravely, even when hope was gone. I have seen entire civilizations, guaranteed, expect a defeat, calmly, with dignity, once resistance became pointless. I believed I understood what desperation looked like in every species I had ever observed. Humans did not fit that pattern at all. At the point in the battle, when it became clear that holding the moon might not be possible, the Ashkarai commander offered the human garrison a chance to surrender peacefully. This is completely normal behavior. Almost any species I have studied would accept such an offer gladly, especially against such a large opposing fleet. It saves lives. It saves resources. It ends conflict quickly and reasonably. The human commander's reply was very short. I recorded the full transmission, but I will not repeat the exact words here, because I do not believe they are appropriate for a formal record. What I will say is that it was not phrased as an acceptance of defeat, and it was not phrased as an angry threat either. It was phrased as something closer to a calm, certain promise. 6 hours later, there were no Ashkarai ships remaining in that system, not retreating, not surrendering. Only quiet fields of broken metal, drifting slowly in the dark. 12 of the original 19 human ships were still functioning. They simply held their position above that cold, icy moon, as if silently daring anyone else to try taking it from them. For a long while afterward, I did not move from my pod. I did not immediately begin writing my full report, even though that was my only task. I simply watched the quiet wreckage drifting through space, and I tried to understand what I had just witnessed. Eventually, curiosity pulled me back to my instruments. I wanted to understand more about the people who had just done something I still could not fully explain. I adjusted my sensors carefully, staying hidden, and began listening to open communication channels between the human ships. Much of what I heard surprised me even more than the battle itself. I expected to hear pride. I expected celebration, perhaps even boasting about their unlikely success. Instead, I heard something quieter, voices checking on each other, names being called out gently across the channels, followed by relief when an answer came back. I heard someone confirm, very softly, the name of the crew member who had remained behind on that first ship, the one whose sacrifice had shattered the enemy formation. There was no cheering when that name was spoken. There was only a short, respectful silence, followed by simple, steady words of thanks. I realized then that I had misunderstood something important. I had assumed that such a sacrifice must have come from desperation, or perhaps from strict orders given without choice. But listening closely, I understood it differently. That person had chosen to stay. The crew spoke of it not as a tragedy forced upon them, but as an act freely given, one they clearly intended to remember and honor for a long time. I stayed in that debris field far longer than my mission required. I told myself it was for additional data collection, and in part that was true. But I also simply wanted to understand more. I watched the human ships begin repair work on each other, sharing supplies and equipment freely between vessels, even though technically, these ships were meant to have separate command structures. I watched smaller shuttles move between ships, carrying medical teams to help injured crew members, moving with quiet urgency and care. At one point, I overheard a young voice, clearly less experienced than the others, asking their commanding officer a simple question. They asked whether it was normal to feel shaken after such a battle, even though they had survived, and even though their side had ultimately succeeded. The commander's answer stayed with me. They said that feeling shaken did not mean something was wrong with you. They said it meant you understood what had truly happened, and that understanding it fully was far better than pretending it had cost nothing. I found myself writing that exchange word for word into my report. Even though it was not strictly required data, it felt important. It still feels important now. After several more hours of observation, I finally began preparing to leave the system and return home with my findings. Before I did, I ran every calculation again, checking and rechecking the numbers, because part of me still hoped I had made some kind of mistake. I had not. 19 ships, facing 72, had won not through overwhelming firepower, but through timing, coordination, and a willingness to accept great personal cost for the benefit of everyone else involved. My full report ended up being far longer than the compact typically expects from a single observation mission. It included detailed information about weapon systems, formation patterns, communication methods, and battle timing, exactly as requested. But it also included something else, something I chose to add, even though it was not specifically asked for. I included a section on what I called their willingness to give. Not simply their willingness to fight, but their willingness to lose something valuable, even themselves, if it meant protecting others. When I finally returned to compact territory, I was questioned extensively by senior observers and military analysts. They wanted numbers. They wanted clear predictions about future encounters. They wanted to know, in simple terms, how dangerous humans might be if the compact ever found itself in conflict with them. I gave them my numbers, because that was my duty. But I also told them plainly that numbers alone would not give them a complete answer. I explained that with most species, if you calculate their maximum firepower and their maximum reasonable losses, you can predict fairly accurately how far they will go before choosing to stop. With humans, I explained, that calculation breaks down, because their limit does not appear to be based on firepower or numbers at all. It appears to be based on how much they care about the people and the goals they are protecting, and that number, as far as I could tell, does not have a clear upper limit. Some of the senior observers seemed unconvinced. They asked if perhaps I had simply witnessed one unusual event, one especially motivated crew, rather than something typical of humans as a whole. It is a fair question, and I could not answer it with complete certainty. I had only observed a single battle. Perhaps other human forces would behave differently under different circumstances. Still, something about what I witnessed felt deeper than simple chance. It was not only the tactics that impressed me, though the tactics were genuinely clever. It was the calm, steady way the crew spoke to each other afterward. It was the quiet honoring of the one who had sacrificed themselves, spoken about not with dramatic sadness, but with simple, lasting respect. It was the way a young, frightened crew member was gently reassured by their commander, without embarrassment or impatience. I do not think I regret this mission because it frightened me, although it certainly did at times. I regret it because I went there planning to reduce an entire species down to simple numbers on a page, a short list of strengths and weaknesses for people back home who would never see what I actually saw. I wanted to measure their worth quickly and move on to my next assignment. What I found instead was much harder to put into a simple report. I found 19 strangers who decided, without much visible hesitation, that a small, icy moon and the safety of their companions mattered more than their own guaranteed survival. I found a crew that could fight with incredible skill, and then, only hours later, speak with gentle patience to a frightened young officer who simply needed reassurance. I am writing these additional thoughts from a quiet, compact outpost, far from Karas 9 now, though the memory of that day has not become any less clear with time. My official report has already been filed and studied many times over, by analysts far more experienced than myself. Still, I find myself returning to this personal account, adding to it slowly, because I believe the full truth of what I witnessed deserves more than cold figures and formation diagrams. I went to observe humans in battle, expecting to measure their strength the same simple way I had measured a dozen other species before them. Instead, I learned that with humans, strength and care seemed to be tied closely together, in a way I had never encountered before. The more something mattered to them, the harder they seemed willing to fight for it, and the less concerned they seemed to be with their own safety along the way. I do not know exactly what this means for the wider galaxy, or for the future relationship between the Compact and humanity. That is a question for wiser minds than mine to answer. What I do know is this: I was sent to observe humans at battle, expecting a short, simple assignment. Instead, I came away with a far deeper respect for them than I ever expected to feel, along with a quiet, lasting sense of caution that I have not been able to fully shake since. I do not think that feeling will fade soon. I am not certain I want it to.